All right. Today I want to talk about listing your home and what the sales process looks like. A lot of homeowners aren't really sure how the process works, much does it cost, how long is it going to take, because a lot of homeowners have been in their house for 20, 30 years and it's been a minute since you went through this process, so I understand that. And others have only been on the process from the buyer side. So today, that's what I'm going to talk about is how does it work when you list your home, what fees are associated when you list with a realtor, and what can you expect along the way. So let's get into it. First, we have the pre-listing process, which is basically when we're gathering information, figuring out how we're going to market the home, what's the home worth, and what are we going to list it as. The first part of that phase is meeting with the agent. So you might interview 2 or 3, you might interview 5, you might only interview 1. It depends on your preference. But that's the first step, is bring an agent to your house, let them take a tour, and what I recommend is you should be the realtor for a few minutes. Give me a tour as if I was a buyer. Sell me the house. What were you drawn to when you bought it? What did you do in terms of updates or upgrades, additions, etc.? Did you do a new roof, new water heater, new furnace, new central air? Let me know what's going on here so I can take some notes and kind of be ready to pitch it to the public as well. Plus, it helps tremendously when it comes to pricing. So yeah, that's the first step. Meet the agent, give them a tour, get some info about the house. There are some people that don't want to have the realtor in. They just want to call and ask, how much do you charge? How much is my house worth? And then they move on to the next person. Do what you want, but in my opinion, if the agent can't see the house, they're not going to be able to price it accurately or as accurately as they could if they saw it. So make sure you have those in-person appointments whenever possible. In addition to talking about the house and giving us information on it, it's also beneficial to figure out what are your goals and expectations. Are you looking to sell and retire? Are you looking to sell and buy a bigger home? Are you moving out of state? Do you have a certain price that you need to get in order to pay off the liens on the house, whether it's mortgage, credit cards, etc.? Is it just important that you get out of the house as soon as possible because you want to get into the new school district for your children? I'm not sure, but let us know that, because that will give us an idea of, okay, how are we going to attack the marketing of this home and get those goals achieved? Because pricing strategies, marketing strategies vary depending on your goals. So first step, meet the agent, get the tour, have that discussion. Next thing, review their marketing strategy. The agent should be able to tell you exactly what they're going to do to sell your house. And if it's simply, I put it on the MLS and then we get multiple offers, yeah, that might be true sometimes, but if that's your only strategy as an agent, then you're not doing your job and not giving the client full service. So find out what the agent will do for you for marketing. After you go over that marketing strategy, now we talk about price. An agent should go through some comps with you, which is comparable sales in the neighborhood, and say, you stack up in between house A and B. I think they were $450, they were $460. I think $455 is a perfect price for your house, whatever the case might be, but it's a discussion. If an agent comes in and says your house is worth X, and they're not bending on that, and they're not explaining themselves, they might be accurate with the price, but you should know why your home should be priced at a certain price point. It is very important for the seller to be included on that discussion. Now, if you don't care and you trust the agent, that's fine too. But if you're really trying to go through the full intensive interview process, that's something that you should find out from them. How did they come up with their numbers? Why is it the price that they say it is? And then you guys need to agree. Because our pricing and your expectations sometimes will vary. In my experience, usually we are closer to what's accurate, but your goals, your expectations need to be considered and need to be discussed. So have that discussion and then truly agree on the price. If there are more than one person that's involved in the listing, i.e. your spouse, or if it's an estate and there's multiple people that are handling the sale, whatever the case might be, everybody needs to agree. Not just the person that met with the agent and intends to sign the paperwork. All decision makers need to be included, because that's how we all agree on a pricing strategy and ultimately get offers and choose the right one, because we know we're all on the same page. So those are the first steps of the pre-listing phase: getting information, getting pricing, and talking about marketing. Now, when I said you need to talk about the marketing strategy with the agent and ask questions, some of the things you should ask, beyond putting it on the MLS, what are you going to do on the web? What are you going to do on social media? Are you going to do any digital ads? And are you going to do any print advertising? And I don't just mean putting it in the Sun or the newspaper. I mean, are you going to do any mailers? Are you going to send any postcards out to people? Are you going to do any of the traditional marketing tactics that are still proven to work, in addition to just putting it on the MLS? When it comes to putting it on the MLS, try to figure out which one is your local one. So I'll give you an example. I'm in Nutley, my office. We service a wide range of areas, but our primary MLS is Garden State MLS. That services Essex, Passaic, Morris, Union, and Sussex counties. There are other areas included in there as well, but those are the primary ones. If you are going to list a home in Essex, Passaic, Union, Morris, it needs to be on Garden State MLS. If it is not, it might get exposure to buyers, but it is not getting exposure to the buyer's agents that work that area. So keep that in mind. If you have a friend that maybe is out of area, make sure they're a member of the MLS that your home is located in. Very critical. Also, when talking about marketing, pricing, and doing that pre-listing process, if you have an agent who's making grandiose claims about, I will get you 15 offers, I will get you 100,000 over asking, be hesitant about that, because there's a couple things at play. One, they might just be trying to get the listing, and when you say things like that, you sound more impressive. Two, their strategy might be to drastically underprice your home in order to drive a bidding war. Now, over the past 3 years, that strategy has worked for the most part, but there will be a day when it does not. And when it doesn't, you do not want to be the seller who is left out in the dark because their house was underpriced and they only got list price because buyers were fed up and didn't want to pay over asking anymore. In my opinion, if your house is worth $500, just for an example, you should be listed anywhere between $479 and $499. If you're going lower than that, you're putting yourself at risk of not getting the value that you deserve, and therefore anybody who's telling you to go 50 or 100,000 over market value, just be a little hesitant. If you're comfortable with that strategy, the decision is always up to you, but just be aware of the factors that go into that kind of stuff. Same thing for overpricing. If you think that you need to be listed 50,000 over to make room for negotiations, or the agent agrees with you on that point, just be a little hesitant, because that's not really how properties get the highest value. You want to come in at or slightly below market value to get the best results. That's just what my experience says, and many of the agents in my office. But figure out what you're comfortable with and just be part of that conversation when listing a home. After you do all that stuff, then we're going to list it. You should get professional photos. You should get a virtual tour. You should make sure that all the materials to market the home are there. If it's a high-end property, consider getting a drone tour, get floor plans updated, maybe get a 3D tour as well. Those buyers in those areas, they like to see those types of things because it gives them an idea of what the house looks like, and it makes it appeal to the higher end, more affluent buyer. If you're not in one of those areas, you can do it, but it doesn't usually add much value to the sale process. Once you get all the marketing stuff together, now we're into open houses. You should do an open house that first weekend after you hit the market, ideally. Depending on how much activity your agent expects, you might do two, you might do one Saturday, one Sunday. The whole point of an open house is to get as many buyers in as possible to view your home. Now, are you always going to get an offer from one of those first group of buyers? Not necessarily. In this market, we've been seeing it a lot because there's been a lot of homes listed that have no showings until that open house, which makes the importance of an open house seem even greater. However, those buyers probably would have made an appointment elsewhere and then made an offer that way. But you want to make sure you do open house, whether the buyer comes from it or not. At the very least, you are weeding out the lookers. The people that might make you leave your house at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday so they could take a look, and then it turns out they were never interested at all. Get them in at the open house, spend a couple hours on the weekend to do it, and get this thing moving along. After you've shown it, you've done your open houses and you have some interest, right now what we're seeing quite often is multiple offers that following week. So let's say you list on a Tuesday, you do your open houses on the weekend, have a few showings after that. Tuesday, you usually have your offers on your table and you can make a decision. Now, as I mentioned before, I would never guarantee that. That's not always how it works, but a lot of times it is lately. If it takes longer, it takes longer. Just make sure that you're flexible on showings, that people can access the property to see the home, and therefore make an offer when you find the right buyer. Once you have your offer or offers, you can negotiate. You are not required to negotiate heavily with anybody. So if your agent said your house is worth 500, you agree, and you get an offer at 400, you don't have to come down and meet them in the middle or do anything like that. You can negotiate how you see fit. But I would recommend that you take the advice of your agent so you can maximize the return on your home when you sell it. Once you do that and negotiate, maybe you do a deadline. Oftentimes it's called highest and best. I like to call it a best offer deadline because highest and best means that you can't counter any of those offers if they're not sufficient. You know, let's say you're 500, you get 6 offers and 2 of them are 5.25, and they're exactly the same terms. Highest and best means you gotta just pick one. But if you say best offers are due by, now you have the window, it's not final, and it doesn't necessarily mean it had to be the highest. I want to negotiate. Maybe this person can put more money down, they can close when I want them to, they're waiving part of their inspection, whatever it might be. But that might be the strategy you use, is one of those deadlines. If not, just field the offers as they come, negotiate, and you ultimately decide. Your agent, like I said, will give you some guidance on how to negotiate and also explain the offers to you, because some of the things to consider are, how are they financing it? How much are they putting down? What's their closing look like? How far out can they wait if needed? Are they waiving any of their inspection or appraisal? All those things come into play. Once you negotiate and you review the offers, you're going to accept one. The next step after that is entering attorney review. An attorney review is simply that. The attorneys for both sides of the deal look over the contract, make adjustments, make changes, add some terminology here and there. The rule of thumb is that it's a 3-day period. However, I've seen it last 1 day and I've seen it last 2 or 3 weeks. It all depends on the contract and the parties involved. But the important thing to remember is that in New Jersey, the attorney review period is available and it's the right of the buyer, and you are not under contract until that attorney review period is concluded, because the buyer can back out at any point for any reason during that period. Once you are out of that period, now they need a reason to cancel without penalty, whether it's an inspection issue or whatever. And that brings us to the next step. Attorney review is done, now you're going into inspections. The inspections, all those fees are on the buyer. They pay for a home inspector, a termite inspector, if they want to do radon, if they want to do tank sweeps, if they want to do anything like that, that's on them to do. So there's no expense to you. But regardless of what your sale looked like at the beginning, whether it was as is or a partial waiver, be prepared for some requests from the buyer. More often than not, once they're in the transaction and they do their inspection, they're going to come up with something that they want to ask about. You know, I want a credit towards the furnace, I need something for the windows to be replaced because they're defective, whatever it might be. But you're not obligated to do anything, and that's the important thing to know. But you have to weigh, is it worth it to re-enter the market after a home inspection that had issues, or do you want to negotiate and make this work? That's why inspections are, more often than not, the reason a deal falls apart, because people can't come to terms on what's being asked. But let's say you do, you get out of that with no requests or no big items and it doesn't cost you anything, fantastic. Next couple of steps are appraisal, which is if they're doing a finance purchase on the home, their bank is going to send someone out to tell them how much it's worth. Sometimes it comes in a little bit less than what we're offering. Sometimes it comes in more. But in this market, it's usually right around the list price, because the market is consistently increasing at a rate that they can forecast. and it's not like all of a sudden it's 50,000 more than it was last week. We dealt with that at the beginning of the pandemic. Now that we're a couple years out from that marketplace, the banks have kind of caught up and the appraisals are pretty consistent. If it does underappraise, so again, we'll use 500 as our number, it appraised for 475. Unless stated otherwise, the buyer does not have to make up that difference, and they do not have to consummate the sale at the 500 number. What you can do is you can try to negotiate how much they need to come up, how much you'll come down, and see if you can make it work. You don't really know how it's going to work out at that point. More often than not, we make it happen. Between the two parties involved, we usually can come to an agreement, because it's usually not a giant discrepancy. You know, it's not going to be purchase price of 5, appraisal of 4. It'll be somewhere closer than that. But it takes it takes a village to make this deal happen at that point if there's an appraisal issue. Now, if during the offer period they put into their contract that they will bridge an appraisal gap, that means whatever number they speculate in there, they're going to be willing to bring that cash to the closing. So at your 500 purchase, if it only appraised for 480, but they said they'd bridge up to a $20,000 gap, you're good. They're bringing that extra 20 to closing. You have your original purchase price. So those are important terms to look at when you're receiving offers. Then the last couple of things, getting the certificate of occupancy. Depending on your township, it might just be a fire certificate, but more often than not, it's going to be a full C of O, as we call it. And that's just make sure that you have smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide detectors. Make sure that there's no open permits or work done without a permit. And also make sure that the house is up to general safety standards with handrails on stairs, proper ventilation for water heaters and furnaces, things like that. I recommend doing that early in the process, not waiting to the last minute, because sometimes it takes a few weeks to get an appointment and then get it done. And let's say there was an issue, you have to have it re-inspected. Now you're adding another week or two on top of it. So do that early in the sale if you can. Last thing, preparing for closing. So what that is really on your end, schedule your movers, make sure that the house is cleaned out based on the terms of the sale when it's supposed to be cleaned out. Do any repairs that you may have agreed upon, and then allow the buyer to do a walkthrough. So either the day of or the day before the closing, they'll do a walkthrough of the property. The goal of the walkthrough is to make sure that the house is in the same condition that it was at the time of the inspection. If there were repairs made, they want to make sure that they were done properly. That's basically the scope of it. If a buyer comes in and starts making additional requests beyond what was originally in the inspection report, that's when things can get a little hairy, because they're really not supposed to do that if it's not a defect that was newly discovered, meaning it was something that happened since the inspection. If it doesn't fall into that category, it's usually not something that needs to be done, but you're right at closing table. So you guys got to figure out what you're going to do. We usually will get in at that point with your attorney. The attorney will give you legal advice on what you're obligated to do and what you're not. In the state of New Jersey, I always defer to attorneys once we're in a transaction. And then we'll give you ideas on, this is what we've seen, this is what we've done in the past, this is how we can be creative to make this appealing for all parties, and we'll make it work. Then you go to the closing table. You typically will do your paperwork a couple days prior, maybe even a couple weeks prior. You don't have to actually attend the closing with the buyer, but you sign your paperwork, they go sign their mortgage docs, we're all set. And that's basically the process of listing your home from pre-listing to closing. A couple things to touch on. What's the timing that I can expect on selling my house? Well, I say typically around 60 days is average from list to close. Can be a little bit more, can be a little bit less. Depends on where we priced it and what your goals and expectations are. But I'd say that's typical. When somebody's buying with a mortgage, 30 days is usually the fastest that we can quote unquote guarantee or reasonably expect. Sometimes it can be done in 2 or 3 weeks depending on the bank. If they're a cash buyer, obviously they can close much quicker because they have funds available. But let's just say, just for argument's sake, about 60 days average. Now, if you need to stay longer, there are options to do that. You can close and then rent it back. You can close and do what's called a use and occupancy. And all of these things should be discussed with your attorney to figure out the legalese of these type of agreements. But there are options for them. Now here's the big one, cost. How much is it going to cost me to sell my house? Whether you're using a realtor or not, there are fees involved. You have to pay taxes, you have to pay some stuff to get it done. Excuse me. So let's talk about commission first, because that's the big one. In the state of New Jersey, commissions are negotiable. So what I'm going to tell you here is just a ballpark estimate. Nobody can say that you have to pay something in terms of commission because it is negotiable. However, what we most commonly see or most often see in the market is between 4 and 6%. If they're charging much more than that, you better make sure you're getting a hell of a package out of them, because 6 is usually the highest we see. If they're charging less than 4, you better make sure they're doing their job, because at that point, we are not paying out enough to entice a buyer broker, because whatever commission you agree upon with your listing agent, that commission, if a buyer's agent comes into the fold, will be split with them, or at least a portion of it will be split with them to pay them for their efforts, their time, and their services. So let's say you're doing 3% and your agent is taking 1.5%. You're only paying out 1.5% to buyer's agents. Now, as buyer agents, we have a responsibility to show all homes that our buyers are interested in. However, if there are 2 homes that match our buyer's criteria identically, and one is paying out 3%, one is paying out 5%, there are agents that will have that conversation with their buyer that say, hey, listen, if you like both of them, just so you know, this one pays me a full commission, this one doesn't. There are some that might not show it at all for that reason, which is unethical, but unfortunately it happens. So we want to make it as appealing as possible, not only to the buyers, but to the buyer's agents. So make sure that you have that conversation when it comes to commission. What are they paying out, and why should you pay what is considered a normal rate to sell your house? In addition to the commission, we have realty transfer tax in New Jersey. We'll just say roughly 1%. A lot of times it's less, sometimes it's a little bit more. All depends on your age, the price of the house, and other factors. So you can discuss that with an accountant, but let's just say 1% for argument's sake. Your attorney fees, anywhere from $12 to $15, sometimes $2,000. Depends on who your attorney is and how much work they have to do. Some bill by the hour, some bill by the number of letters they have to submit. It all depends. Getting the certificate of occupancy from the township can run you anywhere from $75 to $300 depending on the town and whether or not they have to re-inspect. Then if there are permits that have to be closed or work that has to be done, obviously that's an expense as well. And then any repairs that you had to do based on the home inspection. So all in all, let's say we take the high end of the common range, not the standard or required fee, but the common range of 6% plus a 1% transfer, and let's round everything else out to 1%. You're looking at like about 8% is like the high end of the fees to sell your home. Now, I'll give you my little pitch on why you should use a realtor, whether you're paying 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever percent you're paying. Usually what we bring to the table and the exposure that we can bring, the negotiating skills we can bring, that will usually outweigh the cost of commission versus the amount lost if you did it by owner. So what we do and the way that we help you sell your home usually will outweigh the cost of our commission. So I think that when it's all said and done, paying about 5% on the commission side of it for selling your house ultimately will be in your favor, because you're not going to leave those tens of thousands of dollars on the table that you might have if you brought a buyer through a FSBO or for sale by owner. So that's listing your home, that's selling your home, and kind of how the process works. I hope this was informative and gives you an idea how this whole thing works. Thanks for listening.